Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Ross Melzer, and on behalf of Euractiv, it's my pleasure to welcome you to our latest policy debate, working towards a stronger circular economy. How much regulation is needed? Our event today is supported by VDMA, and they are the association representing the German mechanical engineering industry. Once our speakers have given their opening statements, we're going to turn to our panel discussion, and we do look forward to your questions via the Q&A function on the right-hand side of your screen. So please don't be shy to ask your questions, and don't be shy to tweet either. If you are going to tweet, the hashtag to use is in front of me here, hashtag EADebates. So working together towards a stronger circular economy. To kick things off, I'm going to present a quick overview of where we are in the legislative agenda. In order to achieve the EU's 2050 climate neutrality target, the European Commission is planning to announce new initiatives addressing the entire life cycle of products. Since the publication of the Green Deal and the new Circular Economy Action Plan, the topic of a new European product initiative for sustainable products has been on the policy agenda. And concrete proposals are due to be presented in the first quarter of next year. In a moment, we'll hear from William Neal at DG Environment at the European Commission, and he may be able to give us an update on the exact timing. But central to all of this is the plan to establish a horizontal sustainable products initiative. So the Sustainable Products Initiative is meant to be a cornerstone of the EU's endeavours to create a circular economy. It will include proposals to revise the Ecodesign Directive and other legislative measures with the aim to make products placed on the EU market more sustainable. And the potential of digital will be key to provide detailed information about the composition and nature of products for effective reuse or recycling of goods. We're expecting the Sustainable Products Initiative to include rules for setting requirements on mandatory sustainability labelling and disclosure of information to market actors along value chains in the form of a digital product passport. A concern of industry is that such bureaucratic demands, especially for SMEs, will create some burdens. Many industry stakeholders recognize that they can learn from the collection and the processing of circular economy data, but some are worried that a digital passport could mean the disclosure of internal company data and technological know-how, which may put them at a competitive disadvantage. So as with much EU legislation, it really is a question of striking the right balance, a sensible balance that ideally will satisfy policymakers, industry, civil society, and of course, EU consumers. To discuss all these issues this morning, we're joined by William Neal, who is the Advisor for Circular Economy at DG Environment at the European Commission, Ruben Decker, Policy Coordinator in the field of circular economy at the Ministry of Environment of the Netherlands, Jo-Marc Simon, who is Executive Director at Zero Waste Europe, Emma Watkins, Senior Policy Analyst, Low Carbon and Circular Economy at the Institute for European Environmental Policy, and last but not least, Karl Heusgen, who is President of VDMA. To kick off the debate, I've asked William Neal to set the scene and to take us through the Commission's thinking behind the Sustainable Products Initiative, including the different data sets that will be required under the initiative. And William, in your opening statement, I'd also ask you to touch upon this concept of balance that I've just spoken about. So William, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Ross, and good morning, everybody. And I thought that I would try to address the sub-question in the title of this event. I think the title is very interesting. How much regulation is needed? Now, I'm a bureaucrat. We're managing regulation. I'm also an economic historian by academic background. So I thought I'd try and start with the big picture, which is basically well, I'll try to give you 50 years of environment policy in 2 minutes. We had environment policy really developing from the 1970s on the back of several environmental catastrophes, and also the need for a sort of level playing field to back up the single market. And so we had 20 years of regulation. We had 200
His connection. It seems that William has a problem with his connection, so we will come back to William as soon as he is able to reconnect. But in the meantime, I'd like to ask Ruben Decker. Ruben, could you talk to us a little bit about how this legislation is perceived by the Dutch, please?
Yes, thank you, Ross, and good morning to everyone. And I hope William comes back, because I was counting on reflecting on what he was going to say, as you'll understand. But yes, I can say a few things of what we expect the initiative to bring, and maybe first to start indeed with some national context. So the Dutch government already about 5 years ago decided that the Dutch economy should be fully circular by the year 2050, and in between we have set a halfway target, if you like, in 2030 to have a 50% reduction in primary raw material use. Now, looking at that from a perspective of an EU market, this means if our economy is to be fully circular, of course, the products on our market, being the EU market, need to be circular too. They need to fit in that circular economy. And that means they have to be robust. They have to have a long lifetime. If something goes wrong, they need to be repairable. They need to be recyclable at the end of their lifetime, and they need to contain recycled content, because for lack of the primary raw materials we want to get rid of, we will have to reuse the materials in these products. And this all needs to be set at European level. So this is why we have very high expectations of the Sustainable Products Initiative to help us achieve these goals. And we're very much encouraged by what we've already read in, first of all, the Circular Economy Action Plan, of course, but also documents that have come out since, which also state that the intention of the Commission is to make products on the EU market sustainable. In principle, all of them should be sustainable. So where today, rather, the sustainable products are the exemption, the ones where you pay a bit more for, this needs to be reversed. All products in the EU market should by default be sustainable, unless there's very strong arguments why there is no alternative. And that's where we need to go in the long run. And then we're also encouraged by the approach to try and approach this through the Ecodesign legislation, which might not be much more than a widening of the existing Ecodesign Directive, such that we can apply it to other product groups, which allows for a certain graduality in tackling more and more product groups to achieve this sustainability of products. So this is how we would see it working, and how it would serve also our goals in the Netherlands. There's much more detail to discuss, but I won't do that for the sake of time. But let me close for now by saying we really have very high expectations of this initiative, and we hope it comes forward very quickly without much further delay, so we can get to work on it and quickly put it into practice.
Okay, thank you for those initial thoughts, Ruben. We're still reconnecting William, but in the meantime, before turning to our other panelists, we're going to hear a short video statement from David Cormont, who is a French MEP from the Greens European Free Alliance group, and he's also a member of IMCO in the European Parliament. So could we play that video?
Bonjour à toutes et à tous, un grand merci à Euractiv pour votre invitation et de m'accueillir pour cette conférence autour d'une économie circulaire en Europe. Il y a beaucoup de choses à dire à ce sujet, mais pour ces remarques d'ouverture, je vais tâcher de me concentrer sur un angle en particulier que je soumets aux autres intervenants d'aujourd'hui. Nous savons que si tout le monde consommait comme les Européennes et les Européens, il ne nous faudrait pas moins de 3 planètes. Le Parlement l'a rappelé également, une très grande majorité de l'impact environnemental d'un produit, c'est-à-dire de son empreinte écologique globale, vient de sa phase de production. La logique extractiviste du modèle économique dominant actuel est intenable car la prédation sur les ressources naturelles nécessaires à son entretien altère et détruit de manière irréversible les milieux naturels. De plus, les objets ainsi conçus et commercialisés ne le sont pas pour durer. Le plus souvent, sitôt produits, ils deviennent des déchets dont une infime partie sont conçus pour être réutilisés, réparés ou recyclés. Pour vous dire les choses franchement, je ne pense pas que nous pouvons seulement miser sur une meilleure recyclabilité des matériaux pour remédier à cette situation. Bien entendu, il faudrait légiférer pour imposer l'écodesign des objets manufacturés afin qu'ils soient conçus dès le début pour que l'ensemble des composants nécessaires à leur fabrication soient recyclables. Mais nous devons, pour commencer, chercher à garder les produits en circulation sur le marché le plus longtemps possible. Le meilleur produit recyclé est celui qui n'a pas besoin de l'être, c'est-à-dire celui que l'on continue d'utiliser. Cela suppose une innovation radicale par rapport au paradigme économique actuel qui produit, consomme et dispose à un rythme effréné. Pour parvenir à une économie durable, il devient fondamental que les consommateurs et les consommatrices, que les entreprises conservent les produits le plus longtemps possible, que la réparation devienne la norme et que le marché de la seconde main devienne majoritaire dans le mix de la consommation. Une des clés pour cette réalisation est bien sûr la bonne information. Connaître précisément l'impact et la qualité environnementale d'un produit, un affichage obligatoire standard européen de la durabilité et de la réparabilité est fondamental pour que les produits les plus performants pour l'environnement deviennent la norme sur le marché. Introduire des compteurs d'usage, un procédé similaire aux compteurs kilométriques sur les voitures, pour les produits pour lesquels c'est pertinent, pensez à une machine à laver, permettra également de booster la confiance des consommateurs dans la seconde main. Cette information doit également servir à pénaliser les acteurs qui ne jouent pas le jeu de la durabilité. La lutte contre les allégations vertes et la publicité trompeuse rejoint le volet de la bonne information des consommateurs. Un autre grand cheval de bataille sera la lutte contre l'obsolescence prématurée des objets. La durabilité doit devenir la norme. Aligner les garanties légales avec la durée de vie estimée d'un produit et en faire porter la charge financière sur les producteurs et les distributeurs permettra de généraliser la réparation. Si nous parvenons à sécuriser la rétention des produits sur le marché le plus longtemps possible, alors toutes les mesures sur l'éco-conception et les objectifs de recyclabilité et de matériaux recyclés pourront véritablement avoir un impact. Merci encore pour votre invitation et je me réjouis de nos échanges sur cette évolution majeure de notre économie. Bon travail.
Well, that's very interesting to get the parliamentary view from a Green member of Parliament. And our other panellists, please feel free to comment on that as we turn to our panel discussion later. William, we're delighted to have you back. I think you realize that we actually lost you right at the very beginning of your intervention. We did hear from David in the meantime, and also from Ruben, who was talking about how the Netherlands is fully committed to be circular by 2050, and the products on the market need to comply with that, and he's very much looking forward to hearing more about the Sustainable Products Initiative that is due out next or proposed next year. So apologies to ask you to re-deliver your opening statement, but now the floor really is yours.
Yes, thank you, Ross, and my apologies. I was speaking to myself for 4 minutes of the 5. So, what I was trying to do was try and give a bit of the big picture. So I was explaining that environment policy only came in at European level in the 1970s on the back of a few environmental disasters, and it was a very legislative approach. We had 20 years with 200 pieces of regulation in 20 years, really based on sort of polluter pays principle. And then environment became, it came into the treaty in the Single European Act in '86. Sustainable development became a European Union objective in the Amsterdam Treaty in 1997. But throughout those decades, it was very much regulation based and based on punishing polluters. 2009, when Janusz Potocznik became Environment Commissioner, He set up the resource efficiency platform, and then we moved towards the circular economy strategy, which then was reborn into the circular economy action plan. And this was really groundbreaking. We already had sustainable consumption and production instruments. We had EMAS and green public procurement and so on. But really, to do this in a strategic way was really a reaction to the great acceleration in resource use globally, and also the realization that we needed not only to have a regulatory approach. Now, so first circular economy action plan, we did regulation. We reviewed the waste regulations. But we also brought in a strategic approach to one key value chain, which was plastics, which was groundbreaking. With this circular economy action plan, we've continued that approach to key value chains. But the real groundbreaking thing is a new way of using regulation for sustainability and circularity, and that is using single market regulation. And this is a fundamental change. I think it's really groundbreaking. Okay, we had Ecodesign, we've had it for quite a few years, but nevertheless, I think that using in partnership with GROW, because very much we're talking about a joint effort here between Environment, GROW, and DG NR and other services of the Commission. Very important that we're really using GROW's tools, the single market tools, for environmental objectives. So I think it's a regulatory approach, if you like, but it's very different from the old punishing polluters approach. We're really talking about privileging good design. We're talking about providing a level playing field, making sure that we don't have market fragmentation. We're talking about promoting innovation, promoting efficiency and optimization of products. So it's not this sort of hippies versus suits, more regulation or less regulation or better regulation debate. It's really about how we're using regulation in a new way for sustainability. Now, why products? Well, circular economy is a little bit about recycling, is a little bit about waste. It's quite a lot about resource efficiency at the input stage. So, better use of resources at the beginning of the value chain. But it's a lot about slowing down the use of those resources as they flow through the economy in terms of embodied in products and infrastructure and buildings and so on. And this is really the biggest potential for circularity. It's slowing down that river of resources, making it into more of a lake, so that we're using those resources for as long as possible and we're optimizing them. Now, many of those resources and much of the energy is embodied in the products that we use. And if we're throwing them away too quickly, if they don't last long enough, if we're not optimizing their use, then we're really losing all that opportunity. So we really need to make sure that the products that are put on our markets are designed to be durable, repairable, and so on. And this is what we try to do in the Sustainable Product Initiative. So it's a process, it will be a process rather like eco-design, but bringing in circular criteria, so things like durability, repairability, and so on. And as you say, we're looking towards that being adopted in the first quarter of next year. We're now working on refining the impact assessment. So we're looking at the different policy options. So that's still under development. You mentioned the digital aspect of it. Now, the digital revolution has also happened really in the last 10 years. And I said that circular economy is about value retention. Now, so much of the value of a product these days is bound up in the data which is attached to it. But as those products are making their journey through the economy, they're losing so much of that data. And so much of the opportunities for business to business value retention and optimization are lost because the data isn't there. Same goes for end of life in terms of recycling and clean, high quality recyclates. So much of that value is lost because we don't have the data. And again, also for consumers, in terms of making sustainable choices, they need the data and to be able to process that data. So the digital product passport is looking at making that data available. You suggested that this will be a big burden for business. We're talking about mostly existing data. We're talking about a decentralized or distributed approach, so the data doesn't have to move from where it was created. It's not about sort of typing in all the data again onto some big server in Brussels. And also, businesses are already doing this. I mean, in terms of tracking and tracing for logistics, for inventorizing and so on, it's already happening. We're seeing already several initiatives, private sector driven, in things like batteries, electric vehicle batteries and textiles and so on, doing this already, using tracking and tracing for circularity, because there is a business case for it. What we try to do with the Digital Product Passport will be to make sure that that is also working in the public interest. So certain bits of data which might not otherwise be used but are in the public interest should be made available, rather in the overall approach taken by our whole data strategy in our forthcoming Data Act. So it's really harnessing data for public good. So, of course, where it comes to intellectual property, privacy, and so on, we need to make sure that those are dealt with either through encryption or through making data available at a later date. In each case, this will be done product by product and in full consultation. So happy to go into that in greater detail later on, but I'll leave it there and we can get on with some of the other presentations. And I hope that you heard my whole introduction this time. Thank you.
Thank you, William. We heard you very well, and that's a great overview of the past 20 years and how regulation has moved and continues to change away from this punishing polluters concept. I'd like to turn now to Jo-Marc Simon. Having heard from the policymakers, what's your view on the Commission's plan, and do you think the Commission is getting this balance right, Jo-Marc?
Yes, good morning, and thanks for the invitation. Yeah, I think the Commission is doing the right thing. I think that the question of what regulation we need to create a circular economy is a right one, and also framing it from a perspective of going beyond what we have had so far. For me, the starting point is that what we know today is that we don't know, at least as citizens. And most of us have our homes filled with toxic chemicals present in furniture, in floorings, in concrete. We don't have access to locally produced seasonal food or able to make responsible choices when buying clothes, IT equipment, or toys. And when shopping, it's impossible to know whether a product is safe, repairable, recyclable, or durable. So from that perspective, I think information is important for consumers. I think it's also information is going to be key for producers. And what we are seeing is that that's a competitive advantage for those companies that want to stand out in the market. How actually knowing the product that you're putting in the market and knowing how that actually brings added value. The challenge, though, is that we know very well that that information is not enough to change behavior. And yeah, we know that, like, if that would be true, basically we would all be healthier and would be eating less, eating sugary drinks or fatty food. So I think the digital product passport is essential, is very important, but I think it's not enough. I mean, again, we need the repairability, durability, safety requirements. We need to work on misleading green claims. And these are requirements for producers. And I think that those are necessary. And but we also need to be proportionate on the burden we put on the industry. Because if we look at it from, like, take your experience or my own experience, when you buy a so-called sustainable product, take the most efficient, energy efficient hair dryer in the market, you buy it and it breaks, what do you do with it? I mean, you could know everything that is in the hair dryer. You can know that it's safe. You can know that it's repairable. You know it's very energy efficient. But when it breaks, where do you send it? And I think that that's, for me, a key issue that is maybe not being discussed enough is how do we build the infrastructure so that that we can actually send back or bring back the products when they break, when they need to be repaired, when they need to be recycled, etc., back to a place where actually the value of the material is preserved. Bringing it to like a déchetterie or like a drop-off point where you know that's going to be actually so-called recycled, but mostly it's not going to be repaired for sure. I mean, we have already lost the battle there. So for me, sustainability is important that we have the information, but we need to work on infrastructure. I think that that's something that is overlooked. And when it comes to legislation, I feel that the legislation we are working on still is based on the idea that the products that we put in the market needs to be sustainable. But how do we connect that to the fact that we want most companies to get back their own products, so that they have an interest in knowing what is in there, so that because they know how to produce them, because they need to put the spare parts in the market, and because this way also consumers have the way to preserve value. And for me, that's the part that it is missing in the conversation. Information is good, requirements are good, but we need the infrastructure to make this work. Otherwise, it's like asking a car producer to build their own roads. We don't do that, right? So when you need to know that if you're a small company and you put a product in the market, you don't need to build yourself the infrastructure to take back your stuff. It would be good that you have infrastructure that takes back mattresses, that takes back computers to be repaired, or washing machines. And these are kind of the roads of circularity for the European economy, which today don't exist. Today, the roads in the European economy are all for linear products. These are roads that go straight into the landfill, incineration, or downcycling plant, and that's what needs to be changed.
Okay, well, thank you for those initial comments, Jeremy. We'll certainly come back to this point on infrastructure, because it is an important one. But before we do, Emma Watkins, what are your initial thoughts, please, Emma?
Well, one of the things that I think is worth highlighting is that the new the renewed focus on product is really important, and it's highly justified. Just a couple of statistics to justify that focus on product in the circular economy approach. The production of goods, including food, actually accounts for 1/5 of the EU's total emissions. So it's very very important in terms of the climate objectives. And in 2019, less than 12% of the materials used to produce products in the EU27 were actually recycled. So there's a lot to be done in using the actual recycled material. To achieve complex policy objectives like circular economy, like more sustainable products, I think it's important to highlight that a mix of policy approaches is needed. And I think that's what the Commission is trying to do with this Sustainable Products Initiative. Experience, I think, has told us that trying to do something like this through one single piece of legislation or one single type of policy instrument doesn't tend to work too well. So it's good to have that mix of policies in place. Another part of the picture where I think there's a balance that needs to be struck is at the different levels of governance, so the different levels that action can be taken. I think it's appropriate that at the EU level there are overarching objectives set, so emissions reductions targets, targets for recyclability and for recycled content, those kinds of issues, and also common product standards or criteria. That's obviously very well done at the EU level to ensure that circularity is EU-wide. Then at the member state level, there are actions that can be taken, such as using economic instruments, taxes, fees, etc., to make sure that the prices are right for recycled products or sustainable products as opposed to less sustainable products. Business and industry obviously has a huge role to play. Manufacturers do innovate to some extent on their own because it's good for business, obviously, but in some cases it's also helpful to have that legislation as part of the picture to push in a certain direction. And then, as has also been said already, the consumers and individuals, all of us have our role to play in making good product choices, but it's crucial that we have the right information in order to do that. So that I think that's where the digital potential comes in, the digital product passports. They're not just providing information for policymakers and making producers provide that information, but that also very worthwhile, I think, from the consumer side. Yeah, I think I'll leave it there for now, and then we can pick up some other points during the discussion.
That's great, Emma. Thank you for those initial remarks. So, Karl Heusgen, what's the view of industry on the Commission's proposal?
It seems like we look at the whole issue from a different perspective. If you listen to the examples that we have heard so far, we've been talking exclusively about consumer goods. And I'm representing the mechanical engineering industry, which is basically, we are the people that produce components, machines, manufacturing lines to make such products. And it is very typical for such machines that do have a very long lifetime. The average lifetime, for example, for a drilling machine, a metal drilling machine, is over 20 years. I'm representing a company that does hydraulic components and hydraulic systems, and we still service power units that we have delivered decades ago. And also a major difference is Juan has mentioned infrastructure for serviceability. This is in place in the case of industry. And it's simply due to the fact that a machine has a much higher value than a consumer good. So the guy who runs the machine has a basic interest to make it last long before he has to buy another one. And most of those machines that are produced, they have a second life somewhere else. So if the original buyer is investing in a new machine, the old machine is not going to be thrown away, but it goes into a second life cycle, maybe in another factory or in another country. So we do have totally different characteristics. And it is very important to see that if you look at the circular economy, the mechanical engineering industry is kind of the enabler of a circular economy, because you cannot think of any recycling process. You cannot think of any logistic infrastructure, as mentioned by Johan Mark, which does not consist of equipment made by the mechanical engineering industry. So we're kind of the enabler industry to make such systems work. Now, we all share the objective of getting into a circular economy. I personally believe it's key. It's much more important than many other issues we talk about in these days. And if you look at the digital product path, which is the proposal on the table, for us it is key that there is a clear differentiation between consumer goods, mass production goods, with a relatively short lifetime on the one side, and long-lasting investment goods, which are normally produced in low or maximum medium quantities on the other side. We cannot apply the same regulation to both. A few words on regulation. I very much liked William's introductory statement. There is a history, a positive history of environmental or sustainability regulation in Europe, and I think this is something we can really be proud of, and it sets us ahead of other regions in the world. So there is no objection from the industry against regulation. You know, I don't see that. Sometimes it's kind, you know, people paint it like kind of a conflict, but it's not a kind of conflict. Regulation is a must. And the big question is, what is a smart and efficient regulation? And this is why, if you look at the DDP, we strongly call for a differentiated approach, as mentioned before. So far at this point in time, and let's go to the discussion.
Okay, thank you, Colin. I'm actually going to pick up on something you just brought up in your initial remarks. And it's this idea of a one-size-fits-all approach when designing circular economy legislation. So in other words, should all manufacturing companies, regardless of size, be asked to provide this same level of detail? Or perhaps should SPI requirements be established on a sector-by-sector or product-by-product basis, taking into account the differences in sectors, in products? William, I'll come to you in a second, but just as Ruben didn't have the chance to fully respond to your initial remarks, Ruben, let me give you the floor, and can you try and address this question of whether one size fits all is appropriate in designing circular economy legislation?
Thanks, Ross. Well, yeah, well, it's more a question for William, I'd have to say. But in our view, well, yes and no. I mean, on the one hand, we have Europe, we have European legislation to set the level playing field for everyone. So all products on the EU market have to comply with the same levels, with the same standards, exactly to have fair competition, also for smaller players, because otherwise you would actually be hurting the smaller ones as compared to the bigger ones. And at the same time, no, because yes, we understand that what you need for a circular economy, what you need to make products more sustainable, will vary between product groups, of course. With the millions and millions of different products on the EU market, you will not be able to design one single set of requirements or approaches that will cover all of them. So this will always be a mix of general rules and principles. I heard Ms. Watkins say a few things about that, maybe objectives, maybe the standards that can apply to all products, but that will necessarily be limited because it's not specific enough. And at the same time, you will need more in-depth approach per product category to slowly but surely cover more and more product groups in a more tailor-made way to really address circularity issues specific for those products. This is the balancing exercise, I think, that you also mentioned yourself, Ross, that we will have to do. It's sometimes nitty-gritty and boring, but it has to be done.
Okay, thank you. William, what's your view on this one size fits all, please?
Well, I can certainly reassure Carl, because the whole approach, I mean, we're basing this on eco-design. I mean, as I say, we're still in the process of defining and arguing our preferred options in the impact assessment. But the whole approach, it's no secret, is based on eco-design. It's based on the idea of having some horizontal principles and scope definition, but that it's a process. It will be through delegated acts based on different product groups, because we have to have a product group specific approach to the physical requirements for products, but also to the data requirements. And so we would envisage to have, of course, some horizontal requirements, but very much a product by product based approach. So I mean, the kind of data that you would need for capital equipment are completely different from, as you say, consumer products, and from a bottle of shampoo to a smartphone. Of course, the data requirements are going to be extremely different. And I think that, as Carl said, this has been happening, I mean, for a long period in capital equipment. I mean, companies doing business to business like Caterpillar or Xerox have been repairing their machines for years and doing leasing arrangements and providing their products as a service. So this has been happening for many years in those high value sectors. We really need to move that to consumer products without necessarily increasing the price of those products. And if we do, we're talking in many cases about increasing access to those products so that consumers don't have the initial outlay. And just to respond a little bit to what Jean-Marc was saying, because I think just as a corollary of what he said about the need for that infrastructure, I think we should bring jobs into this as well, because if you have a hierarchy of value retention, if you're repairing things rather than recycling them, rather than landfilling them, the higher you go up that hierarchy, the more jobs are involved, the more job intensive it is, and many skills, not just low quality jobs, but all kinds of ranges of skills. And I think that bringing that infrastructure in should be one area that member states concentrate on in their recovery plans and the use of the recovery and resilience funds. Because if we're looking at renovation of buildings, if we're looking at many other aspects, the economic and job potential of those services and that infrastructure is huge. Not to mention the strategic autonomy benefits. So I think there are many wins there. I mean, we could debate about that for a long time, but we shouldn't ignore the employment possibilities.
Yeah, no, point well taken. Thank you, William. Emma, you had something to add on this one-size-fits-all approach.
Yeah, just to go back to that for a moment, I would agree with the previous panelists' comments that it's pretty unlikely to be appropriate in this case, either in terms of products or in terms of the companies that are being, that have to produce the passports. You could perhaps envisage an approach that's a little bit like what's done in some extended producer responsibility schemes. So you could have a certain set of kind of minimum information requirements that are required for all of the products within the scope. So kind of the more basic or the more headline figures, and then you could require more detail, for example, for products that have a higher environmental impact, or for ones that are more commonly placed on the market in larger volumes, or for producers who produce a lot more and place a lot more on the market. So I think you can potentially differentiate the information provision requirements in those ways as well, maybe looking at EPR schemes as a bit of inspiration.
Okay, let me move on to a slightly different theme. A number of you brought up this idea of the concept of information on products, product characteristics. And obviously this information needs to fulfill several criteria. It must be meaningful, easy to understand, reliable, comparable, verifiable, and it also must have an improvement potential from a sustainability perspective. Now that's an awful lot. So how can all that be ensured? Because the quality of data provided will be a key factor in the successful implementation of this legislation. Jo-Marc, you brought this up, and Emma, you alluded to it as well. But Jo-Marc, what's your thoughts on this, please? How can it be ensured?
Yes. Very quickly, as I said, I agree that we need a differentiated approach for different product categories. Not all information we need overarching, like minimum standards for across the board, but then we need specific information. However, as I said, like information is only one factor. I think it's alone is not enough. But for sure, for me, key information related to what I said about infrastructure is, where can I bring this thing once I have a problem with it? I think that's, for me, like, if I would summarize it, I mean, there's lots of other things, but I would put this on the table, to be short.
Okay. Emma, do you want to add anything to this information issue?
I mean, in terms of data is always key, and it's always a big challenge, I think, in anything that's policy development related. So anything that can be done to improve the quality of data is a good thing. I would suggest that maybe, I mean, one thing that I think the Commission is quite good at doing is providing guidance to accompany legislation. So guidance on how it should be implemented, guidance on reporting, for example, the criteria, the information that needs to be reported, how it can be calculated, so you have a comparability between the data that's reported. So I think that's somewhere where action is probably needed to provide guidance to producers so that they know exactly what to report, how to report, and when to report. And one other thing that I think Jean-Marc also just alluded to slightly is that once you have that data, it's important to do something with it. You know, we're not just, I assume that the data is not just being collected just active interest, you know, it's to be used. So I think it's important to ensure that there's the right kind of follow-up and analysis of the data that's gathered. Is it really contributing to the development of more sustainable products? What needs to be done in the future? Does the reporting need to be changed? Is more information needed? So I think that it's important to have ownership of that data and to use it in the best way possible to achieve the sustainable product objectives.
William, I'll come to you in a second on this information question, and just back to Carl quickly. I mean, Carl, with all this data and information that industry has been asked for, do you see opportunities for innovation or new business models in any way?
Well, before I get to the opportunities, which are definitely there, William has mentioned some of them in his initial statement. I'd like to respond to a few issues here. Emma has basically described a system of different layers of information, general information or data, and then it gets more specific as you move up the pyramid. It's still a horizontal approach, and I think that maybe we are slightly, or not slightly, we are heavily underestimating the complexity of products from the industrial background. When we start on the simple side and we look at a t-shirt, the textile products, we have relatively simple products that consists of a limited number of materials, and it's relatively easy to collect the respective data on such a product. If you move on to a sneaker, and then you move on to a cell phone or to a hairdryer, you already have more complex products, and maybe the example of the hairdryer is already showing that it may not be so easy to collect the right data, which is really meaningful and which is giving us progress, but it's still possible, and the hairdryer is still a mass production product. The hairdryer is a totally primitive product compared to a forklift truck, to a machine tool, to a filling line for water bottles, a real primitive product. And we are talking about a totally different level of complexity, and that also applies to collecting the right data on such industrial products. We have value chains that are not just 3, 4, 5 steps, but that are maybe 20, 25, or 31 steps from the raw material to the ready-made machine. We have thousands, or in some cases, 10,000s of components going into such a machine. And I think we're underestimating the complexity. And this is why we still believe that the horizontal approach is not the smartest and most efficient solution. And we would apply the resources in designing now this new regulation much more efficiently if you take it by product and start with those products where the highest leverage can be achieved.
Okay, thank you. William, try and respond to all those comments on information and data, please.
Yes, thanks. I'm reminded of the phrase TMI, too much information. And yeah, we're not underestimating the complexity, but I think it's very important to understand that we're not looking to build massive servers with all possible data on all possible products. We're looking, as I said, through this process to identify the most important bits of data for different product groups. Now, that might mean, for example, I spoke to a woman who was building recycling plants in Flanders for textiles a while ago. She said, if I have PVC print on a synthetic garment and it gets into my lot, it ruins the batch. So just by having that, it could be something else. It could be a dye or a glue or whatever in whatever product. There can be one thing which can ruin a batch, which can render unviable recycling and can contaminate a lot. We need to know about that. That's just one piece of information. We need to identify those important bits of information. Now, if Porsche can trace the origin right back to source of all of the materials going into a Porsche Taycan, which they're now doing, because they think it's worthwhile business-wise and in terms of due diligence and so on, then I think that we can put together a process where we identify those bits of information which are really killers in terms of ruining value if that information is not made available along the line. And I predict, I mean, we'll see in a few years, but I predict that we will see with the European Digital Product Passport those important pieces of data being obligatory to be attached via the unique identifier to that product as it makes its path through. But I predict that we will see a lot more information voluntarily made available. So I can give an example. If you look at the batteries regulation, in there we have the obligation to have a unique identifier on every electric vehicle battery. It's in co-decision at the moment, so we can't predict the outcome. But the Commission proposal has a unique identifier obligation, and then there's an annex with a series of types of data which would have to be attached to that. And there's B2B, there's B2C, and there's B2G, business to business, business to consumer, business to government. If you look at what's already happening in parallel with the Global Batteries Alliance, where BASF and BMW and Circularize and various public and private bodies globally are working on identifying the system's interoperability and data which they think that should be attached to electric vehicle batteries, it's much bigger, because they realize that if you can work out the optimum moment when you take the battery out of the vehicle and use it for energy storage, and if you can make that market work by, making sure that the performance is measured and that the residual value is calculated and the buyers are aware of that, then there's a business case for it. So I can envisage that in many product group areas we will have additional add-on data coming voluntarily from the private sector, and what we require in terms of the European Digital Product Passport will be very small but very important data.
We've got a number of good questions that are coming in, so let me turn to some of those now. First one to yourself, William. Will the new criteria, besides material efficiency parameters such as recyclability, repairability, etc., also look at environmental impacts of products, carbon footprints and pollution? And this is from Lisa Klutz from OVAM. Addressed to you, William.
Oh, thank you, Lisa. And yes, thank you very much, and hello to Lisa. We are looking at the possibility of including product environmental footprint data to the passport. And one thing I should say, actually, because this links to what Emma was saying earlier about a lot of existing data and horizontal data. There is product-generated data, which we would need to consider, but there is also data which is existing in other places, not with the producer or the source. So the SCIP database is one example for chemicals, product environmental footprint data, and the idea would be that through the European data space for smart circular applications, which we announced in the data strategy, we would be able to bring together those data sources without having to require companies to input large amounts of data which is not there. So you'll be able to create those interlinks. So that is what we're looking at, and that is certainly on the cards in the impact assessment.
Okay. We have another question here from Lucas M. Circular economy also means making waste a resource. How can the SPI help waste operators bring out the value of waste? Joe Mark, do you like to answer that one?
Yeah, sure. One of the challenges, and William has already raised this, that recyclers have these days is actually not knowing what comes into the recycling plants. That could be plastic, but also metals, etc. And one of the challenges for the recyclers in general is that if you put like a mixed material in, even if it's the same polymer or the same alloy, etc., not having full knowledge of what goes in, then what goes out as well is going to be lower quality. So quality is incredibly important. So from that perspective, knowing what is in the products is going to be key to ensure that recyclers do their job and produce quality recyclate. So that is for sure. But I think it's also like on top of that, this information allows not only for better recycling, but also for better disassembly. And that's, for me, it might look like that's a part of reuse, etc., but it's a key part for recycling. Lots of problems we're having today in Europe is that instead of disassembling and then keeping the materials and recycling, what we do is we just shred them, we crush them, and then you can only downcycle in the best scenario. So for sure, I think it's the DPP, if well played, can be very important tool to have the feedback mechanism between producers and actually the end of pipe managers, which are the recyclers.
Okay, thank you. Have another question here from Alan Des from FEA. Question again to William. Will the Commission specifically tackle the issue of product liability for reused products, so legislation, guidance, etc.?
That's a good question. I understand that DG Grow, the Commission at the moment, is looking into product liability directive in terms of products that are put back on the market. It's a very important question. I think Jean-Marc has said it, the importance of avoiding waste and making sure that we have the infrastructure there for repairability and so on. But when you get to the stage where, say, a product is remanufactured, so you take the core and you replace the worn parts and you put it back on the market as a new product with a warranty, then of course you need to consider the liability for that. I don't think this would be addressed in the context of the Sustainable Products Initiative, but I think it is on the radar in terms of the Product Liability Directive review.
Ruben, I think you had something you wanted to add to this?
Well, actually, that was on the previous point of how the initiative could help recyclers, if you like, which was to re-emphasize a point that we find very important as the Netherlands on recycled content. So as far as we're concerned, the initiative would also really push more recycled content in products, which of course would be a good thing for recyclers. As to the point of product liability, I have to say at the moment we don't see a problem. So we would hope that that there isn't one. But of course, we'd be willing to think about that if there's more data on where exactly the problems lie. But yeah, I think for us the real issue for now is making sure that the products are fit for the circular economy that we have on our market.
Okay. Let me come to a question. Someone in the chat here has brought up skip and asks, is the evaluation of skip part of the assessment for the DPP approach? And we know that there are a number of databases that already exist, such as SKIP. For those who don't know, SKIP is the European Chemicals Agency database for information on substances of concern in products. It was established under the Waste Framework Directive. But Carl, a question for you. Are you reassured or confident that there isn't an undue amount of duplication being asked with a number of these databases already existing?
Well, at this moment in time, I have to trust William, what he said, that it will be feasible. I have to admit that from our perspective, we are a little doubtful that it will be, but we look forward to it. If you look at another example, the Ecodesign Directive, which is also, let's say, a fairly detailed and complex regulation, to the largest extent, it worked out well. So there are some people in my industry that have a different opinion, but overall, I think there is a positive attitude because it created a framework which has a high degree of reliability for the producers of equipment. And even though it also creates bureaucracy and additional work, at the end of the day, the balance is positive. And I think that's the challenge also now for the new regulation. And we connect this also with with our idea not to use the Ecodesign Directive now and enlarge it or open it up, but leave the Ecodesign Directive as it is and come forward with a different directive now for this issue here. And if you take the Ecodesign Directive as a good example, then it might be possible. But I admit I'm doubtful. And you also have to imagine, we heard some examples now from the big companies, from BASF or from the car industry. But the industry we are talking about, not just here, but in many other fields as well, in all European countries, is the classical medium-sized businesses. And those medium-sized businesses simply do not have the resources to come forward with such concepts as car manufacturers in connection now with the battery value chain might do. So we are talking about a totally different picture here as well. So every regulation must also be feasible for this kind of company and not for big companies that have the resources to handle such regulation.
Okay. William, we have a number of questions that are coming in on the digital product passport and how it can deal with intellectual property rights. And I know you've mentioned this in some earlier comments, but there's a question here asking you to further elaborate on the different options considered. There are actually a couple of questions on this. So just take us through again how this is not going to infringe the IPR of different companies.
Well, thank you. That's a very important question, one which we've certainly considered. I think it's fundamental to understand what I said before, that this will be a process, product group by product group, with consultation. I think that the important role that the Commission has here is a convening power and power of arbitration. And the thing that doesn't come out of the voluntary initiatives that are already happening, the voluntary product passports, which we're seeing in certain value chains, is you don't necessarily convene all of the actors. Now, if we can get for each product group, the suppliers, the component manufacturers, the OEMs, the retailers, wholesalers, distributors, the consumers, representatives, the recyclers and the waste managers around the same table, and that waste manager can say about textiles, oh, that particular dye or material is a problem for me. I need to know if it's in a product and it needs to be machine readable. The producer might say, yes, I don't want to divulge that because that's intellectual property. I don't want to make available information to my competitors or whatever, commercially sensitive information. And then we have to discuss that. And there will be various possibilities, technological or non-technological, to do that, either through things like encryption or agreements for certain levels of information. So when we're talking about the design of the data model, there can be different access rights and different filters. So there are technological possibilities. There are also non-technological possibilities, such as saying, okay, well, it's not, there isn't an obligation to make it available, or it has to be after 5 years when the products are likely to come to the end of their life and it's not commercially sensitive anymore. So it has to be, as I say, on a product by product basis, but there are technological and non-technological ways to deal with those issues. The key thing is to get people around the table to identify which data is the important data.
Okay, thank you for that. We have a question here from Eleanor Metre-Ekern that brings up a different issue, and that's the issue of the social dimension. And she asks, a CE will not work if we solely focus on the environmental aspects of sustainability. Is the Commission considering a sustainability due diligence for producers? Will Ecodesign ever include issues of workers' rights? And what about affordability of products for all? William, please start with that one.
Well, the scope within which we're preparing this proposal is it's sustainability and it's circularity. It's part of the Circular Economy Action Plan. As I say, we're using single market tools, but a lot of the examples which we've been looking at, particularly on the digital product passport, are coming from the world of due diligence. I've been looking at examples. Carl mentioned that the problems for small and medium-sized enterprises, but I've seen examples of due diligence of mining in Africa, where really even informal enterprises are putting QR codes on their materials, and they're being tracked and traced as they go through the system. So we're certainly getting inspired by a lot of these examples, and I would expect that once we have unique identifiers on products attached to the information requirements that we have in the European Digital Product Passport, this will also open up many possibilities for improving due diligence and the social aspects. And we could also see it being used for many other applications. We already see it for things like trafficking of illegal tobacco, and that's already in European regulation, a rather more intensive and heavy-handed approach because it's aiming at different things. But you could use it for EPR, you could use it for taxation, you could use it for many other things, having a unique identifier and attaching data to a product. It's not confined to the realms of circularity, but what we're talking about today and what we're trying to do is about circularity. We receive many telephone calls from other services of the Commission. They're very interested in what we're doing, not least on the due diligence side, of course.
Yeah. Carl, you had a very quick comment on this point as well, please.
Well, I don't know whether it's very quick, because it is a real complex issue that was raised by the person who asked this question. Sorry, I didn't get the name. How do we combine the social aspect of sustainability with the environmental aspect of sustainability? Because that is also a question of what is the price of the product finally for the consumer. And I start with I do an example from which is also discussed nowadays. It's e-mobility, battery-driven electric cars. They're a relatively expensive thing to buy. And if you look into the market analyze where are electric cars sold today, we're mainly talking about wealthy metropolitan areas where such cars are sold today. And this is very clear. You know, if you take the European picture and you live in southern Italy or in Portugal or in Bulgaria, and first of all, there is no infrastructure to load your car, and second of all, you simply don't have the money, then how do you do it? Fiat 500 Electro has an initial price of roughly 25,000 euro. A Dacia Sandero with a small combustion engine has 9,000 euro. It's larger than the Fiat 500. So if you just want to drive and you have to take some load, or you have to take your family along and you have to drive to work and back or whatever, then the question, the social question is, do you want to buy an electric car or do you buy a combustion engine? By the way, we might have different opinions anyway on the environmental aspect of a combustion engine, but that's a different story. I just want to point out that the social aspect, if we talk about a hairdryer, let me take this example. If we talk about a hairdryer and you switch, and this is very important, so I totally agree to the target, we switch to different materials, we only use sustainable materials, and we create an infrastructure that a hairdryer, which if you buy it in a supermarket today, has a price of maybe 30 euro, and you want to create a value chain for repair, and at the same time keep the price of the consumer, you're trying to square the circle. And we have to be aware of that, that if we want to make, if we want to create environmental sustainability throughout the whole value chain, it comes at a cost. This is unavoidable. And this is something I think we have to integrate in our thinking. The other aspect of the question was workers' rights throughout the value chain. I think we here in this group are aware that there is some legislation coming on this one on a EU level. The mandatory due diligence for supply chain, that's what the regulation is about, and we already have it in Germany. In this case, Germany is a little faster than the EU, trying to set an example for this kind of regulation, which we all find has also a good objective, and it is also very difficult to make that regulation in detail work. But it's on the way, at least, which is important.
Okay. We are approaching the last few minutes of today's debate. So, William, I know you wanted to reply to Carl there, but I'd ask you to do so and incorporate it in a short summing up statement. All of you have about 60 seconds to give us your final thoughts. And William, let's start with you, please.
Well, thank you, Ross. It's been a fascinating discussion. I was pleased that we came on to the social aspects, because I think, Gilets Jaunes has taught us that a lot is about how things are presented, and that, but nevertheless, we have to take this seriously. Of course, in some cases, producing a product which is better will cost more, but also it is in the interest of consumers in the longer term to have products which are repairable, which don't break, which can be used for longer. And I would say that the solution where where purchase is going to be more expensive is that we go for shared products, and we talk about access, not ownership. Now, I know for Germans and their cars, this is a difficult issue, and it's also very much about status and habit. But in general, I think that we shouldn't assume that the greener solutions and the more circular solutions are more expensive necessarily. But just to finalize, I think that going back to the big picture, we talked about expanding eco-design internally in the Commission 10 years ago. The Green Deal is really the political level motor which is making it happen. And to see circularity at the center of that, and see Green Deal as the growth strategy of Europe, and after the pandemic as the recovery strategy of Europe, really puts it in the center there. And I think that the Sustainable Product Initiative really has a huge potential because of that.
Thank you, William. Ruben, your concluding remarks, please.
Thanks, yes. And to begin with, I couldn't agree more with what William has said. We are also very happy to see that the Green Deal really takes the front of the policy attention right now, and we really have high expectations of SPI. Maybe to add one point on the social, yes, we think social element is very important. You should look at this. We should make it all work for everybody. But my hobby horse lately has become to say we need to realize that sustainable is not necessarily mean more expensive. Just like more expensive today does not necessarily mean what you're buying is more sustainable. It's exactly this element we have to look at. We have to set new basic levels of sustainability on our markets, and this will mean a change in where costs land. As like today, the costs tend to land with the more sustainable products. This is what we need to reverse, to make sure the costs land with the unsustainable ones. And unfortunately, William, that goes back to the polluter pays, but we still believe in it. And we think this is still something to depart from. But yeah, really in closing, we really very much look forward to the initiatives from the Commission, and we anticipate that this will be a real game changer on the EU market. We hope it will deliver on that. Thanks.
Thank you, Ruben. Jean-Marc, please.
Yeah, following up on what Ruben said, I think we have a good opportunity ahead of us. Let's not forget that what makes a product sustainable is the characteristics of the product itself, but also the use that we make of it. And I think that the Sustainable Product Initiative and eco-design, etc., is very good at the first part, but it failed to tackle actually the use we make of it. How are we going to make it last? How can we repair it, etc.? So I feel that we need to think about products, but beyond products, because products need to fit in a bigger kind of a frame. And I go back to what I said in the beginning, we need to build the infrastructure that allows for a sustainable use of products, because you can have sustainable products that are used unsustainably. So there's an opportunity for job creation, for transparency, for safety, for closing the loop, and actually build back better. Honestly, I couldn't agree more with what William said. It's an opportunity to now create infrastructure for actually using things sustainably, because sustainable products alone will not make it.
Thank you, Jean-Marc. Emma, over to you, please.
Thanks, Ross. Like everybody, I think I'll be very interested to see the proposals when they're published at the start of next year. I think if they're well designed and also well implemented, then the SPI and the digital product passports have a lot of potential benefits. So related to environmental improvements, also benefits for regulators to help them to keep track of improvements in sustainability of products. Benefits also for business to demonstrate their environmental credentials and what they're doing to help the circularity, and also for consumers to give us the information that we need to make the right sustainable product choices. So yeah, I look forward to seeing the proposals when they're published at the start of next year.
Thank you, Emma. And Carl, please.
The good thing is we all agree on the objective, and I like this very much. That gives us already a consensus, which is not usual nowadays. So we agree on the objective, and we probably also agree on the tools to a large extent. My plea one more time is to make it a differentiated tool, make legislation smart and efficient, use your resources in such a way that you regulate those things with the highest leverage first, and maybe those things with less leverage later on. And last not least, make it now a transparent process. We do not feel that the process has been very transparent so far. The results of the public consultation have not yet been publicly shared, and it was not yet possible for us to give input to the impact assessment. So I think if you make this a bottom-up process involving stakeholders, then it's going to be a great result.
Thank you, Carl, and thank you to all our panelists and also our audience this morning. We await the legislative proposal in the first quarter of next year with great anticipation, William. And in the meantime, Euractiv will continue to report on all things circular economy, so please read our coverage. But otherwise, a very good day to all of you. Goodbye.